Hello there, and welcome to the next generation of mobile credentialing for facility security with BioConnect and HID Global. My name is Josh Levitt, Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at BioConnect, and I will be hosting this informative webinar today. I, for one, am really excited to hear from our panelists today to discuss some very relevant topics around security, compliance, and trust. Hopefully, some of you joining us today saw the press release on Monday. BioConnect is thrilled to announce a collaboration with HID Global to bring scalable, adaptable authentication to its HID mobile access solution alongside a mobile survey option for wellness declaration, employee health status, and activity logging. First, though, I want to thank everyone for attending this event. We realize there are lots of virtual events happening every day. So the fact that you chose to attend our event today makes us incredibly grateful. Thank you very much. A few housekeeping items. Everyone on the line will be muted except the panelists. So if you have any questions, please add them into the chat window or the Q&A section on the bottom of the Zoom page. We will leave some time at the end to read these questions and have the panelists respond. Also, this event will be recorded and shared with all attendees if others were not able to come. So joining us today, Stephen Carney is Vice President of Product Marketing for Physical Access Control at HID Global. The PACS business area is responsible for the HID readers, credentials, including mobile access, controllers, including Mercury, and the HID Origo Cloud platform. Stephen is a product management professional with more than 15 years of innovative, versatile, and effective leadership in marketing, legal, and military environments. Courtney Gibson is CTO and CISO at BioConnect. Courtney is a member of the executive team with responsibility for BioConnect's engineering vision and product roadmap, which led to our recent SIA New Product Showcase win for Best Convergence and Integration Solution for the BioConnect Enterprise Product Suite. But before we get things started, hot off the press, we have a brand new short video discussing the partnership with HID Global and BioConnect. And after the video, Courtney is going to spend a few minutes outlining the solution in more detail so that everyone understands the value that it brings to the industry. So we should have the video running right now. Not sure if we have the audio.
BioConnect partners with HID to create a new solution that allows users to gain access to secured spaces using their mobile devices. A user simply walks up to the door and taps their phone on the HID reader. Then they get a push notification to their phone, prompting them to complete biometric verification. The user is granted access and a detailed audit log is kept.
Our convenient mobile solution allows for quick provisioning of your users from your existing physical access control systems such as Genetec, Lenel, and Software House, while adding an extra layer of security at the door through best-in-class biometric security.
For more information, visit bioconnect.com.
So with that, I'll pass it over to Courtney to kind of jump in a little bit to review some of your slides on the platform. You're muted there, Courtney.
Thanks very much, Josh, and sorry about that. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. Just want to give a brief overview of some of the solutions that we've been able to provide for customers, some of the problems that they've been facing, where we've been able to connect with them, and how we've been able to use some new technology to create, I think, some pretty innovative solutions for some needs that we're seeing in the market. One of the things that certainly has accelerated with COVID over the last year and a bit is just movement of a number of boundaries. We have seen more and more value being put onto digital infrastructure. E-commerce dollar flows are up as people are working remotely and more flexibly. We've got more and more intellectual property and corporate data flowing through networks. And even just the shift in remote workforce means that how our buildings are being used is changing a lot. And as value shifts, risk shifts, and we need to think differently about how we're addressing security in various places in our enterprise in ways that are different than we did a few years ago. And as an example of some of these shifts, one in 10 digital breaches is now the result of a physical breach. There's a lot of value flowing through networks, and costs are up. Cost of a breach in the U.S. is now nearing $9 million, and on average. And the good thing with averages is that averages lie. And what we've seen with customers is that while costs are up on average, people who have taken advantage of consolidation opportunities, people who've taken advantage of newer security opportunities, for them, costs are actually down for a number of reasons that we can address. And BioConnect has really tried to play a role in the conversation of how can we bring new technology in to increase security, reduce friction, and address some of these compliance needs. And I am really excited that we've been able to partner with HID to bring a new and I think significant technology into our platform. And it's in the form of bringing the HID mobile credential together with our biometric mobile solution. And it allows a lot of flexibility to come into systems without needing to bring a screwdriver out at all. With your existing credential-enabled readers, you can now start to use your phones not just to get people through doors, but to change the security of how they do that. And I'll talk quickly about how that comes into play and what some of the solutions are that you might be able to connect with. As I mentioned, there's been a real shift in risk. There's been a real shift in the regulatory environment. We've seen both from a regulated industry perspective and also from a privacy perspective. And it means that different areas of our building now need to get flexible in terms of how we provide security, either because of things like HIPAA or SOC 2 or PCI DSS, or because people need to rethink how they're leveraging their budgets. And they may be looking for force multipliers on even their security budget to say, I want a security guard, a nighttime guard who's covering 50,000 square feet to be able to cover 200,000 square feet now. And what technology advantages can I bring in to help me accomplish that? The driver behind this solution, this integration with HID, really is to bring a lot of flexibility to the readers that you're using today. We can support, as the credentials do today, just tap to enter for most doors or for business hours. And then we can extend from there to say for some spaces or sometimes you may want additional audit trails. You may want additional authentication through a more traditional multi-factor authenticator. You may want to solve some compliance needs and actually ask people whether they're healthy to get into a certain space or other questions around why they're accessing places. You may wish to be able to tie in other authenticators that you're using for VPN access or other authentication into your platform. And we can provide biometric authentication as well. So this is about taking the credential that's in your phone and really turning your existing readers into biometric readers, into compliance tools, into an ability to build a really flexible solution to meet end user needs. As I say, extending just the who are you question before you get into spaces into a how are you question or a why are you here question. We've found the opportunity to really create some interesting and flexible solutions around compliance for users to say before you get into a particular area or before you service a particular piece of infrastructure, knowing not just who's there, but why are you there, how long are you going to be there, means that you can address compliance needs, you can help alert security staff if somebody's forgotten to secure something after they've left. We create opportunities for a two-way flow of communication around security. If you're interested, contact us. We can talk more as well. There's often questions of things like privacy and security as we deal with more advanced authentication technologies for users. Our biometric solution really started in the payments space with financial services, and has come into physical security. And I think we've got a really interesting solution around data controls and data flows. For us, the biometrics solution for our mobile app, biometrics stay on the mobile phone. And we've got a lot of security around how and where information flows in our systems to create really easy answers for privacy and compliance as well. So as Josh said, and as the video highlighted, we've got integrations with all of the leading access control manufacturers. Through HID, we've got the ability to tie into their cloud. It means that we have the ability to work with existing systems. There's no additional credentialing, entering of user information. We work with systems that are there. We work with systems that scale. It's easy to secure 10 doors. It's hard to secure 10 buildings or 50,000 employees. We have the ability to work at enterprise scale, and we have the ability to continue to innovate these solutions I've talked about have come out in the last few months. We've got a roadmap of other features coming as well. Really want to provide some opportunities to future-proof end users and be able to have their buildings and their security change at the speed at which digital risk is changing and enterprise risk is changing. I hope this is a real accelerant to folks as they look at problems that they have today and ones that are coming up over the horizon. Josh, I'll turn things back to you.
Thanks, Courtney. That's I think that's really helpful. All right, let's jump right in. So first question for Courtney. We hear about it all the time. I hear about it all the time talking to partners. Companies have this system for access control. They have that system for biometric access, another system for data cabinets, et cetera, et cetera. Now, how do you define a platform approach in the context of physical access? And what do you see are the main benefits for end users to switch from a disparate type of system to a more unified approach to access control?
That's a good question. We often run in. We often meet a lot of customers when they're struggling with questions of unification, and it's because of one of two things. They're either facing internal pressures of scale. They're about to add a new building. They're about to add a new M&A acquisition. They're discovering that their solution doesn't scale to 10 buildings or a new access control system or other issues. Or they're facing external pressures around regulatory compliance, SOC 2, HIPAA, privacy changes. And for them, unification really means three things. It gives them the freedom to scale. It lets them do it more securely. And it solves compliance problems in some really creative ways. And for me, the notion of platform approaches to physical security really come down to efficiency and data. Platforms provide integration that lead to a lot of efficiencies, and every efficiency removes another obstacle, so your team can go back and focus on their jobs. In the digital space, we've been integrating systems and moving to federated identity for years, and it brings a lot of benefits. It means you've got consistent policies. It means that you can better track anomalies. It means that when an employee has left, their access has been disabled, and there's a lot of benefits there. Fewer cracks in unified systems mean you have better security, and breach costs go down, right? On average, you see breach costs go down by about 60% if you unify. Single monitoring means your staff can identify problems faster, and faster identification time, faster containment of breaches because you have unified data means that you identify problems faster, you resolve them faster, and the net is that your compliance costs go down a lot as you bring things together. So for me, platform, when it comes to physical access systems, really means that you can accelerate your ability to adapt to threats, you can accelerate your ability to adapt to scale, and you can accelerate your ability to adapt to regulatory changes. And once you've adapted to those, your staff can go back to the business of doing their job and looking after the people and places that are critical to your infrastructure. So for me, the platform approaches and opportunities like this with this integration with HID really draw together physical and traditional digital technologies to let us create new, cheaper, more resilient solutions than we've ever been able to before. And I think that for me is the really interesting promise of platform approaches and things like this solution.
Great. Well, thanks. Next question for Steve, because I really want your perspective. I also seem to have more and more conversations around touchless and the convenience when it comes to access control. Now, how are mobile credentials changing the way we think about physical access control?
I think I could do an answer on that probably for a whole hour. That's quite a question.
We'll
So
give you a good few minutes for sure. So
about 5 minutes.
very intriguing.
We can pull that down. One, and it goes to the talent in BioConnect, is about security, right? You can enhance the security in a mobile credential in a way that's difficult to do in cards. There are different ways to do that, but and I'll come back to it in a second, but the mobile phones have their own hardware secure elements inside, for one. Two, you're in a cloud environment, and there are ways in best practices to certify that cloud environment and ensure the cybersecurity around it. You also have the options that BioConnect, and by the way, HID is also extremely excited about the partnership. We have a deep respect for the capabilities in BioConnect, not just the multi-factor authentication, but the talent around integration, which is so important. Goes back to the cloud and mobile. In the world of mobile, it implies cloud, and the world of cloud, it is all about integration. So you have the security side to this. You also have an evolving ecosystem of integrations. You have evolving partnerships. So the way that plays itself out, as we see it at HID, in access, physical access begins to change. It begins to evolve around the kind of partnerships and ecosystems one sees in cloud-based platforms. Additionally, once you're in the cloud, and with the mobile capability, there's data. And when there's data, there's a lot of opportunity around insights. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but that really has the possibility to transform what is possibly perceived as a static industry or in physical access control, controller, reader, card. In the era of COVID, certainly, the mobility gives a controlled environment for an individual. They own it. It's not dangling off them. It's in their pocket. They're comfortable with it. There's also elements around how the credential gets distributed. Right? That credential can be done and is done over the air. Nobody has to go into an office. Nobody has to mail anything. So you have costs. If anybody's in the shipping business right now, shipping, receiving, or sending, you know what's going on in the cost structure. So imagine a back to work environment. It comes September in many countries. I don't know how many of you still know where your cards are for wherever your office is, but I'm guessing there are a lot of people who don't. So there's going to be a lot of distribution costs, possibly if you need to go photograph a person, getting them into the office, so on and so forth. So mobile is really a game changer. It's been around a little while. So when things tend to be around a while, they tend maybe to look like it won't take off. But I think, with the recent announcement of Apple getting into this space, expanding beyond what they've done and we've partnered with them to do it in higher education, expanding that out into the corporate world on a global basis, you can expect a whole host of adoption focus on a variety of verticals. And in fact, when you think about all the security Apple brings, the BioConnect solution adds value on top of things that even Apple can't deliver. So, the mobile phone, while it's not under the control of the security professional, the security director, is a very secure way to make access control easier, to enable services and data and the like. So, it's a game changer. We use that word a lot, but as this takes hold in the industry, it will change so much for everyone.
And speaking of universities, like a major university we have recent discussions with, they're going to be going fully cardless as of this calendar year for the incoming year. Within a couple of years, there will be no physical cards. And I think that really is a big statement. So I know, Cordy, I know you have some comments on, the changing way in physical mobile credentials in the physical world.
For sure, and I think I was embarrassed as Steve said, "You know where your card is." I was actually looking. I know where my phone is, but my my HID card. I'm gonna have to dig through that desk a little bit to find it. It's I think I think mobile credentials. Yes, and for me, I agree with Steve. I think the data side of what is possible when it comes to moving credentials onto the mobile phone is tremendous, and it's because strengthening it's not just strengthening the security of who are you, but I really do believe that there's some interesting possibilities that we've already been engaging with a number of customers on around these questions of how are you and why are you here? And I think those that two-way flow of data, I think, opens some really interesting opportunities to have people more positively participate in the security of themselves and their spaces and the infrastructure of enterprise. So I think that's for me opens a lot of interesting doors of things that we can be doing. And as with Steve, I'm really excited about the opportunity to not have to have people physically come in to receive a piece of plastic in order to get into their enterprise. And I think the ability to remotely credential and more seamlessly transition people around places is going to be key to really offering a modern, flexible option for enterprise.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Cody, next question for you. I recently read an article about a company in Illinois. Won't say who it is. Got fined for not getting the proper authorization to use biometric technology. You've seen others.
Yep.
Different states have different rules, but there's been a lot of recent changes to privacy legislation, across the U.S. and around the world. Like, how should organizations be thinking about it and reacting to this?
Yeah, I think there's a near term and a longer term answer to that, and you're right. Change is coming quickly. It's in the U.S. It's coming state by state, which has been a focus of advocacy and education in a lot of sectors. We've organizations that do business in Europe have been learning about how to do business under the GDPR umbrella for a number of years now, and other countries are coming into alignment with that. Bill C-11 in Canada, we're about to see something similar come in on the Canadian landscape. Looks very much like that. I say whether it's the nearer term and the longer term horizon that you're taking on privacy, I think it comes down really to three things. You need to close your gaps in your system and understand that you have a unified set of controls, because information, knowing where information is, but also controlling where that information goes is critical. You need to consolidate systems to the extent that you can. Fewer pools of personal information just makes the job of privacy compliance a lot easier. And you need to understand where your data sits. And comment that Steve had made earlier, the opportunity to put in, if you don't need to centralize, if you don't need to own the information, understanding that some of this, like biometric data, is owned by the end users and you should be keeping it in their hands, simplifies things a lot as well. So I think those are general things that apply. I think on the shorter term horizon, you mentioned Illinois, there is sort of a reactive answer to privacy right now, which is making sure that you have consent mechanisms and you have proper disclosures to your users in place in order to deal with what we already have in place from a privacy perspective. And slightly over the horizon, I think from a planning perspective on privacy, you really need to look at where things are going. I think GDPR is already there. And we're going to all be dealing soon with issues like the right to be forgotten, the right to restrict processing, the right for data portability. And it really requires a robust understanding of where your data sits. And it requires systems that can give you the flexibility to build those controls. And we've been looking a lot as we move into the mobile phone, what we can do to build solutions to get the consent tracking from users, to understand and have a very clean story around where data sits and how things flow, and the tools that we can build out to support that. I know a lot of other people are looking at that as well, but for us, as I say, I think there's a near term and a planning over the horizon answer, and the horizon's pretty close when it comes to a lot of states and where things are changing. So you need the consolidation, you need the tools, and you need a good story around what you're doing with data flows and users. So I think that's important.
Now, speaking of stories, Steve, I don't know, what's your story around these kinds of messages from your perspective? I know you have some thoughts on this. You must.
Privacy is, for HID, being a global company, anybody subject to GDPR has been living this for a little while now. And as Courtney mentioned, this is happening state by state. But let's just, I want to maybe introduce a concept here about how this will begin to impact us in access control. There's a concept in GDPR called PII, right? Personally identifiable information. It also is the case that if you have a file somewhere with your PII and you add something, any piece of data to that file, it is now PII. So on your access control system, there's name, possibly address, static UID. Static UID that is now identifying a person and is transmitted in the clear in many respects. This is how the type of privacy concerns will begin to change and impact our business. In fact, going back real quick to the Apple comparison, in their implementation, there will be no static UID. Right? It's all dynamic UID for one reason, privacy. So whether it's influences of GDPR coming our way, whether it's influences from high tech and IT coming our way, privacy will begin to change the landscape for us. At first, little by little, but eventually best practice will become common practice. And so that's just one way I see this really impacting us, maybe a trickle today in North America, but the tidal wave is coming.
Right. Thank you. Steve, data is such an important part of our world today, especially with all the IoT devices. I mean, they're so ubiquitous, right? You see all those commercials, right? It's everywhere. What role do you currently see data playing in the enterprise security decision-making process? And where do you think data will be focused on in the future?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Many manufacturers in our industry are beginning to refer to readers as sensors. They might not even call them readers anymore in their documentation, and that's a good indication that change is coming our way, because what is a sensor? It's a collector of data.
Yep.
I think we all know the influence of IT in the decision-making process of physical security. So, and in many cases, in end users I deal with, the physical security department may roll up into an IT leader. And so they have expectations, certainly security and cybersecurity, but they also understand the value of data and what data can do. And once you go down the mobile path and a connected architecture, you are in the cloud and you are now a collector of data. As Courtney mentioned before, you have to be very careful with the data you collect and how you collect it, but it is there. Now, what does that do for us in our industry? It changes the value proposition at a fundamental level, where we in physical security are typically a cost center, essentially. That data now has value. And so there's a concept referred to as democratization of data, sharing the data with the customer, allowing we can now be the supplier of insights to their enterprise. That has value. Two, we're the generator of data for them to use for their own purposes. The more sophisticated end users certainly know how to use data around their buildings, around their personnel, and now we can extend out from physical access into that building, right, and add value into the utilization, into the energy use, so on and so forth. But one more part here that is important for us in our space is the intelligence around data. Data, eventually, when you have enough of it, can be turned into intelligence. We all know that seamless access control is something the industry has been chasing for some time. I don't have a badge. I'm just doing my thing. Today, the phone can help that, but data really eventually can unlock the seamlessness of access control's potential. Why? If you've been dealing in the area of seamless access control, you know that intent detection is one of the critical elements, right? Am I going through door A or door B? They're near each other. I can't be unlocking the wrong door. That's a hard nut to crack. The data begins to add the insights and the intelligence to give us a whole new experience in access control. So mobile is the first step down that path. And there are all sorts of services and capabilities that we can add on top of that add value into the enterprise. So for instance, having a location service capability. So people know when they're maybe too close together or they're getting into a people count situation for the maximum of the facility. COVID has really impacted how business will manage their space, and access control and the data there can now supply them the insights to do that more effectively. So the data is the key, and it really can transform the value we as security professionals offer up to and drive into the enterprises that we serve.
Yeah. I hear Courtney talk about intelligence all the time, so I'm sure you have some thoughts on this, Courtney, to add.
Yeah, no, I think on Steve touched on both elements that I see as huge game changers on data as well. I think we have just as random examples from end user conversations I can think of in the last few months. We've spoken to people who have a food court in their building, and as COVID has been changing, occupancy rates are saying, hey, some of my tenants want to avoid spoilage, and we really would love to know how people are moving through buildings and when. I'd like to be able to better schedule my cleaning staff by knowing how people are accessing buildings. There's a lot of secondary uses for data that will drive decision making in places as we come back to work, as we continue to evolve and deal with a more fluid workforce going forward. And I think there is tremendous value, and internally we've been spending a lot of effort as well looking at what you can do with machine learning, with the data that's already there within systems, without creating new pools. How do you, as Steve says, more intelligently gain insights around intent detection, around anomaly detection, looking at how people move through facilities. And the more of these sensors that you have, the richer that data set, and it means that you can create different and better levels of security without putting friction on your end users and without making them feel like you don't trust them. And I think that's been an objection that we've seen to some technologies out there. That we've heard from users saying, "Hey, we want to treat our employees like trusted professionals, and while we need to ensure that we're meeting our new regulatory obligations, we're meeting our new security obligations, we don't want to make people feel like they're under surveillance, but they're under security." And those solutions, I think, are really driven by what we can bring to market with some of these new converged technologies. So I'm excited with what we've already got, and I would say don't mistake this first step of integration as our only step. I think that we've still got a long way of partnership to go in terms of driving data and mobile technologies to build some of these exciting new data futures together.
Yeah, for sure. For next question for Courtney, as people are starting to come back to the office, not everybody's coming at the same time. I ran into talked to a company, and they had issues where somebody got into an area, there wasn't many people in the office anymore, and there was a potential disastrous data breach. So, there's going to be issues around compliance, especially when it comes to accessing secure spaces. So how does adding a multi-factor authentication to HID mobile credential or HID mobile access help to meet stricter compliance standards, in the post-COVID world? Because we're getting there.
Yeah, no, and I think compliance to me really comes down to, it's no more complicated often than making sure you've got the right people going into the right places for the right reasons. And I think this solution allows us to tackle that seemingly simple sounding problem from a few new angles. just simply getting the credential onto the phone and having the flexibility to add additional security. If you're looking at times like you mentioned, Josh, where buildings are less occupied and we're a little more concerned about who has access to spaces, traditionally we've solved that problem by putting people in, we're putting security guards in, and I think there's an interesting opportunity to use technology as a force multiplier on those people to say, look, I would like to have my security staff be able to cover a larger area because my building at certain times can itself become more secure. And I think there's an interesting opportunity there. But specifically on the compliance side, getting the right people into the right places. The question of who are you and can I deal with external threats is something that we've been evolving technology for a long time. And I think, for all the reasons that Steve mentioned, we've got now the ability to build more secure credentials, more secure credential distribution, and more secure authentication when those credentials are used. And between the HID mobile credential technology and the ability to put the positive authentication of biometrics in and around this means that we can really deal with that external threat problem of the who are you, I think, a lot more effectively. But then there's the last part of compliance, which is the right people into the right places for the right reasons. And that last part deals with the internal threat to your organization and your infrastructure and your systems. And traditional credentials have been limited in some capacities in terms of really tackling that internal threat problem. Maybe it's the right person into the right place, but they're there for the wrong reasons, and there's a lot of compliance around that too. And being able to extend into the compliance questions of why are you here and what are you doing in this space, and asking some additional questions to strengthen your compliance controls around access really allows you to better cover that whole spectrum of not just external threats, but internal threats. You can do it more efficiently, and you can do it with the tools and the hardware and the PAC systems that you have today. And I think for me, there's some real strength that comes from combining the mobile credential and the mobile technology that we bring together into a solution. It allows you to tackle all of those.
Yeah, great answer. Last question, then I could jump into some. It looks like we have a bunch of questions in the chat. Steve, multi-factor authentication is so common these days. When logging into apps and using other online services. Everybody does it. I just got a request from my bank. I got to log in, prove who you are. It's everywhere. What is the value that multi-factor authentication and biometrics bring to HID's mobile credential solution? Because it's a big focus of you guys right now.
It is. It really extends the security of the solution and also brings it within, as you mentioned, all sorts of apps require this type of multi-factor authentication. It brings it into the standard expectation of the user. They can be more confident and comfortable in what they're doing, in this case with mobile access, when they know it's being treated like their bank account's being treated or what have you. So, once upon a time, I was in the video business, right when 4x3 screens started to go by 16:9, and standard resolution went into HD and megapixel. And at first, the aspect ratio of the screen was a little weird, but then a year or two later, you would walk into an office and see the old square ones and say to yourself that these guys are behind the times. It's something that simple that impacts the expectation of the consumer. So with the multi-factor authentication, it gives that consumer, in this case, the credential holder, that sense of being as secure as everything else they have. A. B, certainly the security professional, if they have any reticence about mobility as a security capability, can rest assured and have the same confidence when that multi-factor authentication is there. So I think multi-factor authentication may even extend out from its traditional areas of enterprise high security, which we all know I think we know pretty well that multi-factor authentication, where auditing is necessary, or compliance is necessary, or just strictly high security is necessary because that enterprise is under threat of one form or another, day in and day out. So multi-factor authentication in the application of BioConnect serves that purpose, serves it well, serves it in a way that may be difficult to achieve by hanging a fingerprint reader on the wall. And that has to do with the distribution of the template. That template now sits in the phone in control of the owner of the data versus hanging off a wall. So that adds that value, but also protects the security around it. And I'll throw in one more sort of futuristic piece of thinking for North America, but we look at the EU as thought leaders in this space. GDPR, again, if you're subject to it, that's changed how people think and act around all sorts of their enterprise. But they also have recently passed a cybersecurity law. And while that is early enough days where they're still working out the regulation around it, one of the interesting things about it is it mandates levels of security depending on the type of enterprise you are. So if you have things that are under threat, or you have financial data, or you are a hospital, or you are critical infrastructure, it mandates, that doesn't define yet, but it mandates a high level of security, which by definition is above and beyond what is normally used. So we can see that playing itself out in the EU and in potential legislation in North America being reused around cybersecurity. So once that starts to take hold, you can see this type of application being far more commonplace than it is today, up into the higher end of the enterprise.
Great. Well, look, we've got a couple questions actually. One of them I'd like to put to the group here is the functionality leveraging NFC or Bluetooth? So maybe I have Steve answer that right now.
So it can do either. The connection for the BioConnect capability comes through the network, right? It's coming down over data like you would get a PIN request from a bank. That's not connected via Bluetooth or NFC. So the Bluetooth or NFC is what is communicating with the reader, and then that communication goes through the network up to BioConnect's capability, then back down to the phone. So it is really the data connection to the phone that's enabling the BioConnect solution.
And on that end, we do, just to anticipate a follow-up question on that, we do have the ability to function offline as well. So if you're in areas where data connection is either down or patchy, we have secure solutions around enabling that to continue to provide continuity of access with the biometrics, but in limited data coverage. And I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here, but I want to read it. It's a little bit preamble. Interesting comment about people not knowing where their cards are as offices reopen, and ability to enroll people in mobile access remotely before they return. How do we know the correct/current employees are provisioned mobile access? And is this using the Apple iOS, Android Face ID, or employees are already using it on their devices for their own personal applications? So I don't know if who wants to take a shot at that one.
I can start.
Good.
I think as I'd mentioned really quickly as we were going through some of the slides, for us, this mobile application and the biometric authentication actually started for us in the payment space. Our first customer of this technology is a large bank who's using this to authenticate corporate wire transfers. So for them, the users of this technology were not even their own staff that they were able to pull in under mobile device management or other device management technologies. They needed to be able to securely distribute credentials out to strangers who are their, well, not strangers, but non-employees who are their end users. So we've built a solution, and we have a number of ways, whether it's through email, whether it's through SMS, whether it's through paper and QR codes, if that's how people wish to provision. But we have a number of ways of doing secure credential distribution and binding of identity to ensure that the right user gets the right credential. And it's beyond just using the native biometrics on the phone, because the reality is the enterprise may not be fully in control of that mobile device, and users could enroll somebody else. If if I want my daughter to be able to access my phone and I put her ID in there and she can unlock my phone, I don't want uncontrolled access through native biometrics to those credentials. So we provide a way for the enterprise to control the identity verification without needing to control the whole handset.
Anything to add, Steve?
Yeah. So, an interesting statistic, as I was doing some research as we plan out things like card inventory management out into the fall, a record number of people have quit their jobs over the last 12 months. And on the other side of that, the job market's very hot today. So we're going to go into a back to work scenario where by some reports, up to 70% of employers are going to have some type of back to work hybrid scenario. Now, the nice thing about having mobile credentials, if I understand the question correctly, is they can be revoked automatically as soon as the employee is no longer with the organization. That's done in the system, and now that mobile credential is revoked. So there's no real concern about losing control of those. That's you might not always know where your card is, but the phone is on, and when the credential's revoked, they're not getting back through the door again.
Okay, thanks. A couple more questions. I think it's perfect timing. Why can't you drive policy to phones to ensure that the mobile credential on the phone is locked by the facial recognition provided already? Interesting question.
Go ahead.
All right. I think there are a few different, there's a couple of different answers to that. One is, as I alluded to earlier, it may be the case that you may not have full control over all of the mobile phones that are participating in the credentialing. So this solution allows you to serve a broader population without requiring full mobile device management of the handset. So that certainly gives a lot more flexibility in terms of how you can roll this out. Even within that ecosystem, the touch IDs and face IDs of the world were really designed as padlocks to prevent other people from getting into your phone. They really weren't designed as an extension of a corporate identification and authentication mechanism. And there are a lot of ways where the owner of phones can get additional identities into that touch ID or face ID handset, because it's, as I say, it's designed to be a padlock. It's not designed to be an identification service, if that makes sense. So the application of biometrics in this app really nicely splits. The ownership of the template stays with the end user, but the creation and the authentication of that template sits with the enterprise, and it provides a service around identity as opposed to trying to use a padlock as a gateway to identification.
Steve, any additional comment?
Yeah, I think Courtney hit on it pretty well. Each handset, each provider has different ways to access that. So to get that uniform across an enterprise has its challenges. So generally speaking, that we prefer the application of say a BioConnect, because that streamlines that experience. I mean, the experience and the uniformity of the experience is so important. If you're in the tech support business and you're taking a call and you've got to try to get down to which handset is and which firmware rev it is to troubleshoot what you're seeing, that can be a long day and long wait time. So we think about the overall experience and the supportability of that experience across what is a very complex ecosystem of devices.
Okay, great. I think we have time for a couple more questions. With the increase in security, how will this impact the speed of communicating to the reader and gaining access? Working with turnstiles with heavy traffic can create backups at entry points with an added delay. So I'll put that to Steve first, and then maybe you can comment too, Courtney, on this one.
Right. So there are two elements to that question, I think, which is the mobile credential in and of itself and its speed, and then the multi-factor authentication, which I'll let Courtney talk about. But the speed side, there's not necessarily any impact to the speed by using mobile. And in fact, there are scenarios where it can actually be just as fast or a little faster. One application or one way to address that is, and a prior questioner mentioned Bluetooth, BLE, or NFC. And the NFC experience is much shorter range, but far more predictable. BLE has some nuances to its predictability, but can be used at a much greater range. So if in scenarios where you've got a high traffic situation, a BLE solution is a good solution, because that device can be read a little farther away, and whatever transaction time is going to occur will be resolved by the time they get to that gate.
Yeah, and I think on the biometric side of things, or the sort of enhanced authentication side of things, the answer is we can provide a lot of flexibility on that. So if this is a facility where you need to you need someone to actually do a scan to get in, the time for the scan is obviously additive, but it doesn't need to be additive all of the time, and that's where we have a lot of flexibility around. Do you do that scanning during peak hours when you have high volumes, or do you push that higher level of authentication off into other higher security zones? Do you just do it after hours? Or we've had, as it comes to some of the compliance questions and some of the COVID questions, some of those components of security can be done ahead of arriving at the turnstile. We had a customer in a long-term care facility who was looking at needing to do staff screening around COVID before they got into the workplace, and this was a component of access, this COVID survey, for them to get into the facility. And in order to streamline things, in order to cut down on movement through those pinch points, staff were given the ability to fill those surveys out and do that screening before they got to the door. And if they already had, then they just simply went through. So I think there's a lot of, depending on the need and the specific use case, there's a lot of flexibility around creating the higher security without it needing to be tied to the physical. It can start before, it can continue into other areas of the building. I think we're extending the boundaries of where security and decision making and that data gathering can start to be applied.
Right. Okay, so I think we have time for one last question. So this might be, I think, for Steve first. Is thinking about this service as an enterprise administrator, can you share any insights on the costs for enterprises maintaining traditional access card solutions, I guess, versus this too, right? Sooner or later, there will be questions about cost and the value relative to an existing solution. So I'll put that to Steve, because it might be around like traditional versus mobile access.
Yes, I live this question every day. So absolutely, we can think about the return on investment in a couple of different ways. If we're looking straight card to mobile, you have, generally speaking, an average of a card replacement once every 3 years. And there's a cost associated with the card, the issuance of the card, the management of the card. Versus mobile, where the distribution, as I mentioned earlier, is without cost, really. So it's moving through a network that's already been set up. So now customers will think about relative value of one solution versus another and its cost, that always comes into play. The additional discussion around value with mobile is what all the other things it can do as well. So having that extension of data into the enterprise, into the building. Is this a customer, let's say a mid-sized customer who is just running an office with 50 people, or is this a larger enterprise that understands that saving 2% on their HVAC cost in the summer results in a huge amount of operational savings for them? If so, and information on top of mobile can be used to do that, now you have a totally different value proposition. So it is really a change. It's an evolution of how physical security presents itself to the end user. How much more value is there in managing things like HVAC, lighting, meeting room availability, occupation, or just occupancy. Now, just add on the concept of COVID, right? So how many of the enterprises you deal with are going to hot desks versus offices, right? I know of a lot of them. Well, how are you going to manage those hot desks? What kind of information do you need? And is a traditional credential robust enough to support that? So there is always the card to mobile comparison, but there's much more that can be done with mobile that adds the value that it's incumbent upon us as security professionals to understand and be able to communicate.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, it looks like, just wrap up our time together has come to an end. I'd like to thank the panelists today for participating. Very lively discussion. For all the attendees that signed up to learn about the current trends in our industry. Today, more than ever, there seems to be challenges that all enterprises will face when it comes to loss of trust and additional threats due to the new global reality. Having open discussions like this is an amazing way, a great way to share and learn together. So thank you very much for joining. We will send out a recording if anybody's interested. I saw a question come in. Yes, it will go out. And, of course, if you want any other information, we're always here to help. Partners are always here to help. And we look forward to, talking again soon. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Josh, Courtney, Christina.